Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a very interesting little poem, Myself and Mine, number 5 in the Birds of Passage section. And I want to dedicate actually this study here to my 83-year-old mother, who just recently underwent some procedures for her heart. And I just want to say to her, Mom, we love you, and we're praying for you. Now, the assumptions here for this lecture is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, and we've worked everything from the very first word of the deathbed edition, all through the inscriptions, poems, and everything right up and including an introduction to Birds of Passage, and then the poems 1 through 4. Now, our Nortons, as we often will reference to give us some background information here, will tell us that in 1860, this poem was number 10 of the Leaves of Grass group, and in 1867 it was number 2 of another group so named. With the 1871, 72, and 76 editions, it was included in the Passage to India supplement with its present title. Whitman dropped the 2 original opening lines in 1867 for the present opening line, and at the same time deleted just before the present line 26, 2 lines confessing, quote, the evil I really am, end quote. In its announcement of personal intent, it could well be one of the inscription's poems, and I think that's significant. By the way, the lines that were deleted ran like this: it is ended, I dally no more. After today, I inure myself to run, leap, swim, wrestle, fight. And again, deleted in 1867. Now, the poem itself is quite an interesting study in Whitman's iconoclasm. And as well, the dance, can we call it that, between the poet, the reader, and the text, of course, Leaves of Grass. He'll say it this way: myself and mine gymnastic ever, to stand the cold or heat, to take good aim with a gun, to sail a boat, to manage horses, to beget superb children, to speak readily and clearly, to feel at home among common people, and to hold our own in terrible positions on land and sea. By the way, notice here, to start with, this use of the word gymnastic, that is this dance between Whitman himself, Whitman as poet, Whitman as writer, of course, you and me as readers, and then obviously the text that we're playing with as well. Gymnastic also carries with it this idea that there is tremendous energy, and obviously we've said this already in our study of Leaves of Grass. No single text of poetry has more energy and is more energizing, I argue, than the reading of Leaves of Grass. Notice we have 7 times the word to, and here we're going, and we've heard this before, celebrated, to be people of action, people of energy. Stand the cold of the heat, take good aim with a gun. Notice, of course, we're talking about people who are going to be self-reliant on the frontier. Sail a boat, manage horses, beget superb children. By the way, this superb children line also is in the poem From Pent-Up Aching Rivers. Speak readily and clearly, and this idea of speaking the words that are to be spoken is in the tradition, the oral tradition, obviously, of Emerson comes to mind immediately. I love it to feel at home among common people. No single line in all Leaves of Grass captures more the hope of Whitman to be able to speak directly to what he has called in any number of places the average American, the average person, right? To hold our own in terrible positions on land and sea. Go back to Song of Myself, passage 46 for this land and sea thing. But what is up with this terrible positions? Well, challenged. And of course, as readers of the deathbed edition, we would think immediately of the Civil War, right? Not, he says, now we got several of these nots. Not for an embroiderer, that is to say, kind of useless decorator. And then parentheses, there will always be plenty of embroiderers. I welcome them also. In other words, everybody has their role to play, but that's not, in other words, I'm not interested in being fancy, right? But for the fiber of things and for inherent men and women. This idea of the fiber of things takes us back to the idea of growth, fundamental to the way in which Whitman thinks about the very basic process of American democracy. Grassroots is, of course, the term that often gets used. And then again, not to chisel ornaments. In other words, I'm not interested in being showy. Obviously, he has in the back of his mind Europe, doesn't he? But to chisel with free stroke, we're going to hear this word free several times in this poem alone, the heads and limbs of plenteous supreme gods, that the states may realize them walking and talking. Notice gods is capitalized, notice states is capitalized. This will take us, of course, to that idea of Emerson as well, that there's something divine about humans. And to that degree, he's talking, of course, about celebrating how Americans are going to be the driving force of all the democracy of America. And then you have several of these lets. Let me have my own way. Song of Myself, passage 46, it'll come to, Song of Myself, passage 16 will immediately come to mind. Let others promulge the laws, I will make no account of the laws. Let others praise eminent men and hold up peace, I hold up agitation and conflict. I praise no eminent man, I rebuke to his face the one that was thought most worthy. Now, this is obviously iconoclasm. No question. And it's going to be to some degree as well paradoxical. Notice he says, I'm going to have my own way, independent, right? Obviously thinking of Emerson's self-reliance. Let others promulge, that is to promulgate, right, the laws. We've seen this word used several times in Leaves of Grass. I will make no account of the laws, makes us think immediately of Whitman's contemporary Thoreau and civil disobedience, obviously. Let others praise eminent men. By the way, it's the only use in all Leaves of Grass, this word, for eminent men, and hold up peace. I hold up agitation and conflict. And again, the yin-yang symbol comes to mind here of Taoism, right? That idea that there has to be two sides to this thing of democracy. So in some places, he'll promote ideas of peace. Here, he'll promote the ideas of struggle. Then we have parenthetics with the "Who are you?" So popular, obviously, in Leaves of Grass, prairie grass dividing. He uses this idea. Who are you? Notice 5 times now with the word "you." Who are you? And what are you secretly guilty of all your life? This guilty, secretly guilty, is the only time it gets used in all Leaves of Grass. By the way, anytime Whitman uses the word "you" this way, it always is the question, is he talking to you, the reader, or is he talking to himself or his soul, as we saw it in Song of Myself, passage 5? Will you turn aside all your life? Will you grub and chatter all your life? This is a really interesting rhetorical set of questions. That is to say, at what point in your life will you finally recognize that your life is your life? It's yours to live. Nobody else. You have to live it for yourself. And this idea of turning aside, well, it's significant, right? That we're talking about life as living, and then, of course, to sit down, to not go forward. So much of Song of the Open Road is obviously here. And he asks, who are you? Blabbing by rote, years, pages, languages, reminiscences, and then all of a sudden you get it. You realize what he's really speaking to are academics, to individuals who have been celebrating, of course, European poetry, European culture, and the like. But now he's asking, think about it, all it is that you do. My AP guys love the fact that the word blabbing gets used here, blabbing by rote. By the way, this is the only use of blabbing in all of Leaves of Grass. Blabbing by rote, years, pages, languages, reminiscences. In other words, you spend all of your time in the past, he's saying to academics. And of course, we're obviously quite guilty of this. Spend all of our time in the past. He says, when are you ever going to get around to waking up to the very thing that's right here in front of you, namely, of course, your life? And then he says it, unwitting today that you do not know how to speak properly a single word. And again, that last question is an interesting rhetorical one. This idea of being unwitting is that things are going on that you do not completely understand. Obviously, a bit of the translinguistic is here as well. You don't know, passage 46, you'll remember, of Song of Myself. Perhaps you're on it and didn't know. You don't know how to speak properly. In other words, Whitman was taking heat for many of the poems that he called poetry, that critical analyses and critics of poetry said this can't be considered poetry. And Whitman's going to make the argument, no, my poetry is far more important poetry than this poetry that you've been following out of England and, of course, out of Europe. He says, Let others finish specimens. We have to think of Darwin in that word. I never finish specimens, that is to say the new science. I start them by exhaustless laws. We have to think of Emerson in that use of the word laws, as nature does. Notice capitalized. Fresh and modern continually. Whitman is the great poet of modernity. He's the great poet of the now. He's the poet that says, I appreciate the things of the past. What's he say in Song of Myself, passage 1? Schools and creeds in abeyance. In other words, I know that they're there, but I'm far more interested in this modern continual evolution. And then he'll attack even Kant, Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher of duty and the categorical imperative. I give nothing as duties. What others give as duties, I give as living impulses. And then in parenthetics, shall I give the heart's action as a duty? In quote. It's a rhetorical question. In other words, the question is, what's most important? Well, to do your duty, Immanuel Kant says. Yes, but for Whitman, what is that duty? And the first and foremost duty is duty to oneself, especially the idea of independence and freedom, right? Let others dispose of questions. Obviously, he's talking now about academics. Again, I said to you guys, Whitman starts out as a teacher. But I don't think he ever felt at home in a classroom or within the academic community or the extended academic community. I think he always felt his poetry was never fully appreciated by intellectuals and academics. And so he's kind of speaking around them while speaking directly to them. Let others dispose of questions. I dispose of nothing, sounding very much now like Socrates. I arouse unanswerable questions. And in some ways, that's the heart of Leaves of Grass. He loves these unanswerable questions, these translinguistic questions, the questions that matter the most and yet have no clear and easy answers. Who are they I see and touch? And what about them? What about these likes of myself that draw me so close by tender directions and indirections? Now, this idea of tender, 1 hour to madness and joy, go back and look at how he uses that word, right? And you'll remember in Song of Myself, passage 6, tenderly will I use you, curling grass. The idea here, of course, is that there is things that have to matter, but those things are not given to me by someone else. That is to say, what Socrates says in Plato's Apology, the unexamined life is not worth living. You could think of all of Leaves of Grass as a project where Whitman is encouraging us to live the examined life as he learned it from Socrates. And then we get 5 of these I call, watch this, or I, repetition of I. You'll remember in Song of Myself, passage 21, I call to the earth and sea. Here it's, I call to the world. Now this is just pure iconoclasm. And there were contemporaries of Whitman that could not go where he now goes. I call to the world to distrust the accounts of my friends, but listen to my enemies as I myself do. In other words, I'm going to pay as much attention to the people who are my enemies as are my friends. It's an interesting idea from the fallibilist position epistemologically. In other words, I want to know as much what you have to say that goes against what I believe than finding people that are constantly agreeing with me. I charge you forever reject those who would expound me, for I cannot expound myself. This is a wonderful line for all biographers of Whitman, both during contemporaries of his as well as after the fact. He makes the argument, don't even try and write books to explain who I am and what I care about, because I, even myself, cannot expound myself. I charge there be no theory or school founded out of me. You'll remember this from passage 46. I have no chair, no church, no philosophy, and all of that, right? I charge you to leave all free as I have left all free. The celebration of independence and independent thought is central to our reading of Leaves of Grass. And then he finishes. After me, vista. You'll remember he uses this word in Cabin, Ships at Sea. Vista. That's back to that passage 46 of Song of Myself. And I lead you to a knoll and I show you, right? And that's this vista. Oh, I see life is not short but immeasurably long. You'll remember in Psalm of Life, Longfellow says, art is long and time is fleeting and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. Notice here he says, I see life is not short, but immeasurably long. By the way, Whitman was 41 years old in 1860 when this poem is published. Kind of interesting. I henceforth, he says, tread the world. We think of Song of the Open Road, afoot and lighthearted, I take to the open road. I tread the world. Chaste, temperate, interesting that he would make this reference to temperance. He was part of the temperance movement. Chaste having some sexual connotation as well. An early riser, only use in all leaves of grass. Early riser, that phrase. A steady grower, we think, of course, of the evolutionary ideas of constantly growing, right? And, of course, Voltaire's Candide, we must cultivate our own gardens. Every hour. And then he gets radical. The semen of centuries and still of centuries. This use of the word semen, only use in all of leaves of grass, obviously radical for its day. The idea being that out of leaves of grass will grow all of the important ideas of democracy that will carry on for centuries. And then he finishes with 2 lines. I must follow up these continual lessons, Whitman is teacher, right, of the air, water, earth. I perceive I have no time to lose. This no time to lose is repeated as well as Tolson, I wandered Virginia's woods. But I have no time to lose. The sense of alacrity, the sense that I got so much to get done and I don't have a lot of time, and I'm not going to be sidelined by all these people who have ideas about the way I should live my life. That is to say at 2a, to finish now, that obviously life is all about growth, and life is about independent freedom, self-reliance, we might say. At 2b, I love the iconoclastic voice of this poem and the paradoxical, hyperbolic voice of this poem. It's amazing how he can create that voice within a few lines. At 3a, well, obviously we're going to think about all the great iconoclastic thinkers from Chaucer to Swift and Pope, and obviously in the American tradition, Emerson and Thoreau, and obviously we'd have to put Emily Dickinson in there as well. Finally, a couple of 3B questions to help you own this poem. Are you an early riser, and do you celebrate the idea of getting up early? As, of course, Thoreau will say it in Walden, we must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake. And are you a steady grower? I hope that our study of Leaves of Grass is providing that for you. We turn now to an interesting little poem, Year of the Meteors, 59 to 60. It was a very interesting time in history as well. Thank you.